Hello and welcome to ESG Talk, your go-to source for insights and advice from leaders in environmental, social and governance. I'm your host, Andie Wood, Vice President for Regulatory Strategy at Workiva. Today, I'm joined by Jeannie Renné-Malone, who's Vice President of Sustainability at VF Corporation, one of the world's largest apparel, footwear and accessory family of brands, including Vans, the North Face, Timberland and JanSport. Jeannie oversees VF's global sustainability strategy across its brands, operations, supply chain, materials, and products. I'm also joined by Tim Tensen, Chief Operating Officer at Terra Genesis International, an international regenerative design and development firm. Tim has been with Terra Genesis since 2019, working in various capacities across design, innovation, and operations, focused on helping organizations achieve lasting planetary regeneration. And today we're going to tackle the topic of building a sustainable supply chain. Hi, Jeannie and Tim. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, great to be here, Andie.
I want to dive straight into this. This is an absolutely fantastic topic. It's really timely, especially with the combination of the way we're going to talk about supply chain and agriculture. But let's not completely spoil the episode, but start by giving our listeners some background before we dive into your partnership and the amazing things that you're doing together. So, Tim, I know some of our audience probably won't be necessarily familiar with the term regenerative agriculture. So can you define that for us and also maybe talk about how it changes growing practices, maybe impacts the lives of farmers?
Happy to, Andie. It's a really great question, and I think it's as important as ever. There's been a lot of discussion and dialogue and debates, increasingly in mainstream media outlets as well. There was a recent great piece in Financial Times looking at kind of the larger benefits that we're seeing in regenerative agriculture beyond just carbon, and how important it is to understand those. So when we talk about defining regenerative agriculture in our work, we really like to highlight three core components of how we arrive at a definition. And that's to see regenerative agriculture as a paradigm, as principles that are sourced from that paradigm, and as a process that's undertaken in a given place. And a paradigm is a worldview, right? It's kind of a model for that helps us relate to what it is that we're engaged in. And so when we talk about that paradigm of regenerative agriculture, we're talking about something that's seeing humans as, intrinsic parts of nature, that we can be a source for good and enrichment and nourishment and reciprocity in our landscapes. Or we can also make decisions that shortchange and degrade the quality and the vitality of those landscapes. So within that, we like to define a set of principles that help us guide how we're managing our landscapes, how we're interacting, and to view that process as something which unfolds over time. It's a deepening of a relationship between the people and landscape and other actors like companies that may be purchasing goods from that landscape, or trade and other forms of exchange between different regions, countries, et cetera. So I think with that context, the way that we really define regenerative agriculture is as an amalgamation of that change in paradigm, engaging in that process according to those principles and learning together in that process. And, I heard a really great example today of how to describe this. We frequently use the description of engaging in regeneration in landscapes as a flying the plane as we're building it, or riding the bicycle, constructing the bicycle as we're riding it. But I heard today, just an hour ago, a colleague share that, it's actually more like mapping the terrain as we're walking it, right? So it's not so much that the thing isn't there, it's that we're navigating it. We're learning about that landscape that we're in and that we're walking through. And it's a process of mapping as we go. And I think there's a lot of utility in the way that we use metaphors to help us explain the process of regeneration.
So just to briefly touch on that impact on the lives of farmers, is there a good example of a specific thing that a farmer might do that would potentially sort of lead to a more regenerative practice? So would it have something to do with fertilizers maybe, or something to do with which crops they plant, that kind of thing?
So what we see in regenerative agriculture is going to depend on the type of production system. So whether it's a grazing or cropping or agroforestry production. So in something like rubber farmers that we're working with, what we see in these production systems is a great deal more biodiversity than you would see in a conventional or even an organic production system of the same commodity of rubber, right? And what that results in isn't just this kind of great big picture biodiversity, but it actually means that those farmers are able to engage with multiple different markets for different products that are being produced on their landscape. It means their ground is covered, right? So there's more retention of water and moisture in the soil, which gives rise to a lot more soil health and soil biodiversity of the microbiology there. And it also means that there's a lot more habitat for native species, whether they be avian or insect, that wouldn't be present in even an organic rubber production system. And so these are things that then also means that the kind of descriptions that farmers give are almost poetry when they describe getting to work in their farms, because there's other wildlife around them. Their kids enjoy playing in these landscapes, and they're able to feed their family in many cases out of these landscapes, to collect medicine or other household items that can be of use. So in those many ways, I think it just demonstrates that kind of reciprocity and that deep relationship with land that can result from regenerative agriculture.
Fantastic. So I think we've now got a pretty good handle, at least in the short time we've just had, to understand what regenerative agriculture does and what we can achieve with it. So, Jeannie, how does that align specifically with your science-based targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think I'll start out by saying that our commitment to sustainability is deeply embedded in our purpose. So we're focused on the betterment of people and the planet. And our enterprise wide sustainability and responsibility strategy focuses on three key areas, including people, the planet, and our products. In addition, due to the nature of our outdoor activewear brands, we have a responsibility to environmental stewardship and to protect nature so that our consumers can enjoy the outdoors for generations to come. So, to that end, we've set a number of public facing social and environmental targets, including science based targets, which we set back in 2019. And through the process of setting our science based targets, we know that nearly 70% of our scope 3 impact is a result of raw material extraction, processing, and production. So, therefore, focusing on sustainable raw material substitutions represents a significant opportunity to lessen our environmental impact and really a key pathway to meeting our scope 3 target.
So, what exactly is that target as it relates to your material-based emissions?
Sure. So, to guide our efforts, we set a sustainable materials vision. And that really means that our top materials shall originate from regenerative, responsibly sourced, renewable, or recycled sources. So, we really see that as a means to reach our long term targets. And we really see two pathways to work toward this vision. First, we focus on increasing the uptake of commercially available sustainable raw materials, such as recycled polyester, recycled nylon. But we also look at creating a captive supply of new sustainable raw materials, such as those sourced from regenerative practices, exactly to what Tim just described. So, with that, VF and our brands are supporting the development of regenerative supply chains in partnership with Terra Genesis, farmers, and others for our key materials that we use in our products.
Yeah, so you mentioned there that this is very much a partnership, and that your organizations have been working on this since around 2020. So, I mean, Tim, how does Terra Genesis go about selecting the brands it works with? And what maybe stood out about VF when you were looking?
Well, I think Jeannie touched on a lot of what we look for in our brand partners. First of all, I think it's industry leadership, that willingness to be out front, to ask some of the hard questions that don't have answers yet. And I think to do that in a way that's really aligned with their essence as a company, I think that's something that really stands out and makes a company really easy to work with and to partner with in these types of contexts. And I think there's also internally, there's a sort of muscle memory of innovation, that is really important for us to see in companies, that they have not just kind of an appetite for innovation, but they have some experience with it, right? They've tested some of those. They know organizationally how to think about it, how to communicate about that, because it can be intimidating to undertake big initiatives like we've done together. And I think also what's been really key is great working relationships between different departments within a company. So to see that they have either cross-functional working groups internally, or they have some regular communication, particularly between procurement, sustainability, marketing, because that is really a signpost for us that that company is taking sustainability seriously, not just as the problem for sustainability departments to deal with, but as a company, we're committed to this. And I think all of those were present in spades with VF, and is what made, I think, a lot of the kind of trust building, the kind of fuzzy front end process really rewarding for us to enter and engage in. And I think signals to a lot of others in the industry that, this is worth doing and it's possible with committed partners.
I think there's a lot of very useful tips in there for organizations sort of trying to look to achieve, that ability to say, hey, this is how we're taking this seriously, and also that internal partnership as well as external partnership. I think we've already sort of touched on this a bit. This partnership is obviously speaking to a broader context that's not just about reducing emissions within VF's operations, but is very much out and into that value chain or supply chain, depending on your industry. Now, I've talked about this a bit recently in another ESG Talk episode, which was actually about the new European Sustainability Reporting Standards. Obviously, there's a lot in there related to double materiality and value chains. How do you go about assessing opportunities to reduce the environmental impact of your value chain?
So there's really two parts to this. So each year we calculate our annual impacts and develop a greenhouse gas inventory and measure progress toward our voluntary targets. So, for example, our science based targets. And this gives us insight into our largest area of impact and therefore the biggest opportunities for reducing impacts, such as material substitutions, which I spoke about earlier. In addition, as we prepare for emerging regulatory requirements globally, and you just mentioned this with ESRS and also with CSRD, we are putting together internal teams, putting data controls and governance in place, and carrying out additional assessments across the enterprise. For example, we are just finishing up our double materiality assessment, and that will certainly inform the material topics where we will focus going forward.
Okay, so I think we've been working together for, what is it, 3 years now? I think it's now 2024, so we must be getting a bit over that. So this is for both of you then. What would you say are the biggest challenges you've had to overcome? And what metrics are you tracking that help you evaluate the performance of such a long project?
So for us, it was a combination how to get started. And we found Terra Genesis to be the ideal partner, really having those partnerships on the ground. And then eventually how to measure progress. So partnering with Terra Genesis was a critical step in our overall in our regenerative agriculture journey. They had the existing relationship with farmers, and they helped us engage and explain what we were trying to do and how it all tied back to our commitment to sustainability and our public facing goals. The measurement piece has also been a critical part of this. We want to make sure we can transparently and appropriately measure the outcomes, so we know these projects are making a positive difference, and use that into our modeling as we track progress to our voluntary goals and eventually into regulatory reporting. So it's been really exciting to visit the farmers at the beginning of the project, and again, once the regenerative agriculture practices have been put in place, and see firsthand the environmental benefits. And Tim described this perfectly. It's amazing to hear and to see the abundance of nature and biodiversity flourishing. I think that's just an amazing aspect of this work. But it's one thing to see and hear those improvements firsthand, but it's also important to be able to measure progress using captured data. And Terra Genesis was able to develop the framework to measure social and environmental outcomes of this work.
Yeah, Jeannie, I think something that you highlighted there was just your experience of actually going to visit the farmers. And I would say that the biggest challenge and success that we've had has been the trust building, that the trust to engage in an initiative together, the trust to agree on pricing, right? So I think a huge part of this is that rubber is a part of a very volatile market with pretty extreme daily fluctuations, and you know trying to bridge that to a longer term relationship is not always easy when farmers have often been shortchanged in their engagements with buyers of their products, and this is across many different industries that's the case. And so really building that trust, I think, really started with on the ground presence and closing the circle. Our ability to bring shoes that had used the rubber to the farmers and say, look, this is from your farms, right? This wouldn't be possible without you. So I would say that took a long time. It took many years of building and developing those relationships, to the point now where I feel like that's really what's going to enable us not to just have this immediate success, but to be able to continue to build on this through time.
It sounds like that trust is obviously one of the impacts as well that we can see from this exercise. And you've already talked a little bit about how farmers have talked about their new farmland. I mean, what else has this meant for the farmers in Thailand? And how is that related maybe to collecting the data to evaluate and share with VF as well?
Yeah, well, I think there's maybe two important points that I would highlight there. I think the first is that there are many different types of production systems out there. But one of the things that's universal is that we have an aging population of farmers and not enough incentives in place to bring young people in, not only just to manage those landscapes, manage those farms, but actually to inherit the experience, the knowledge that those that have come before them have about that production system, about the uniqueness of that place. If you walk a field with a farmer, they'll tell you where the water pools, where it drains quickly. Those are sorts of things that come with time and experience. And we're at risk of losing that in a lot of different landscapes. And I think that has come across in spades in our conversation with farmers, where many of these farmers are older and they've been practicing these diversified forms of production in some cases for 30 years. So their opportunity to see the data representing what they're doing and demonstrating that they have no reduction in yields, and in some cases improvement in yields, that they have far greater diversity of benefits coming from it, that people want to learn from them. These are things that really drive a sense of esteem that many farmers haven't had, and make it more appealing to young people as well. And I think to the data collection piece, because the farmers themselves, the farmer leaders, were consulted in the process of figuring out what really is going to be significant data to be collecting to help validate against the key reporting requirements, they actually really understand their own farming from that value system better, right? And in that process, as data is being collected digitally or otherwise, it's really exciting, both because there's a digital component, right? So there's these data collectors going around collecting data. Those are things that make it seem like there's actually a future here for young people. There's actually a career here that incorporates new and emerging technology, that incorporates cutting edge science, that incorporates brands like VF and the subsidiary companies, that North Face, Vans, that Timberland, that these young people are excited to wear, excited to see that we're a part of that, right? And so I think I could get into the data itself, but I would just say the kind of culture that it's able to engender around farming, the type of vitality, I think is really critical. And kind of a useful byproduct of digital data collection and the science that we do alongside that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned definitely there the ability to wear some of these products. So, Jeannie, tell us about some of these new products using regenerative rubber.
So yeah, we are super excited that three of our largest brands, Timberland, Vans, and the North Face, are sourcing this regeneratively grown natural rubber and designing into our products. I'll give you a few examples. Starting about a year ago, Timberland launched its first product featuring regeneratively grown natural rubber, the Green Stride Motion 6 Hiker. Vans is now utilizing regeneratively grown natural rubber in its Circle V silhouette, which is the cornerstone of the brand's new Surf VR3 collection, which launched last year in March. And last fall, the North Face launched its first footwear products containing rubber from these diversified rubber farms. And I will just say, I personally am a consumer as well. And last week, I was sporting a pair of Timberlands that 55% of the rubber in the sole is from these plantations. And it's so exciting to walk around. I was actually in some meetings and had the opportunity to really talk about the benefit of regenerative rubber and the benefits to the farmers and to the environment, and then to firsthand show on my feet the outcome of the product that we're generating. So it's really exciting to pull this all together.
It's so helpful to be able to have an example right there. These sound like they might be sort of smaller scale products at the moment, sort of pilot projects maybe. How are projects like this scalable? I mean, is that something you've been thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already seen this project scale in Thailand across several cooperatives, thanks to Terra Genesis. And now there's increasing interest from other industries, such as food, in participating in sourcing, whether it's the rubber or other crops from these plantations. So I think that's one really important area of scale. And as we look at opportunities across other materials in other parts of the world, we're excited about the potential partnerships crossing food and fashion. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of momentum in this area as more companies set science-based targets and other public-facing goals. And those that have a connection to agriculture, such as us, will build in those strategies and roadmaps that aim to store more carbon in the ground than is emitted to the atmosphere. So it's really a combination of building the momentum, the awareness, and really based on data that Terra Genesis helps us gather so we can track progress and communicate the results.
Okay, so let's try and boil everything in that episode down to the closing question, and which we'll go to both of you. See if we can't leave people with something really succinct to think about. So, Tim and Jeannie, why is it important to build partnerships to create more sustainable supply chains? It's clearly a vital piece of this whole picture. So, Tim, let's start with you.
Well, I think there's so many benefits that come from partnership, whether it be partnering with the farmers on the ground, partnering with the project developers like ourselves with VF, or even other brands coming in. And I think some of those benefits include the ability to save each other money in that process, right? When companies are partnering with one another, that money can go further in enabling scaling. I think when you partner with the farmers, it enables a lot of buy-in that's going to enable that growth, that kind of scale that we're talking about wanting to achieve, actually possible. And I think that partnership between ourselves and VF, it's really enabled us to navigate all the different questions that arise in trying to develop and launch an innovative initiative like this. And I think without that strong communication and the ability to kind of say, oh, this is something we haven't experienced before. Let's look at this together, and we'll figure out a way forward. So I think there's numerous benefits to partnership in this type of work.
And I would just build on Tim's comments that we've set ambitious targets and we know we cannot do this alone. So partnerships with Terra Genesis, with the farmers, and with so many others along the way, internal and external to VF, to develop this regenerative rubber supply chain and additional sustainable supply chains going forward is really what's needed to make transformational and positive change. Again, we know we cannot do this alone and really value the partnerships that we've made along the way.
Okay, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you again very much, both of you, for joining us today. That was Jeannie and Tim. To our audience, thank you for joining us for another episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, sustainability, audit, and risk. If you're interested in learning more about how sustainability can push the boundaries of product innovation, I highly recommend you check out one of my very favorite episodes from season 2, Jumpstarting Sustainable Innovation, which features my co-host, Mandy McReynolds, and Noel Kinder, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Nike. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We'll talk again soon.